2024 alone, around 37.8 billion metric tons of CO2 were released from energy production. This represents around 40% of this year's energy production. And this has really helped in climate change, getting a lot more of that. And this has been responsible for a 1.2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature since the start of the Industrial Revolution, which is responsible for a lot more extreme weather patterns, a minus sea level rise, and perhaps even the lack of snow we saw this year. We are headed for a 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius rise in temperature by 2100, which would lead to, I don't have the clicker, yes I do.
Down.
Which would lead to a 1 meter sea level rise. Food production would decrease due to extreme droughts, and in some more arid areas could perhaps even halt, causing famines. Ecosystems would collapse. Say 99% of coral reefs would be gone, a significant amount of the rainforest, the polar ice shelf, all of that, and much, much more. A 1 meter sea level rise doesn't seem significant until you look at this map. All of these dots right here represent where significant flooding would be reported, and this continues basically around the whole world. In the wise words of Gandhi, Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greeds. Humanity cannot sustain life like this for that much longer. Change is needed, and change should have already occurred, but we haven't done that yet. So let's look at a better future that we can aim towards. As humanity does like to live with electricity, it isn't really an option to cut that off, because sure we all like our lights and our heats in our house. So we have to push towards a way that we can work together with the environment to make something better. So that is where green energy comes into play. As electricity production does represent nearly 40% of the world's total emissions, it would make a lot of sense to replace this. While it would not be the end-all be-all fix for climate change, it would put us in a lot better of a place. In this presentation, I will be focusing on solar energy, but there are also other forms of green energy production like geothermal, wind, etc. I'm sure we've all heard of them. So let's give some specs about solar real quick. Just for reference, coal power plants produce 800 to 1,000 grams of CO2 per kilowatt. Natural gas produces 400 to 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt of energy. And solar produces 50 to 70 grams of CO2 per kilowatt, which is significantly lower than the rest, but still not zero. A big thing to know about green energy is even though it is supposed to be fully green, there is still emissions that come along with it via the assembly process that we will be talking about in this presentation. But that does not mean that it is worse than these other two options, as we have talked about. But solar does offer zero running emissions, and it converts the sunlight that we should hopefully have an indefinite amount of into electricity that goes right into our grid. And the price of these solar panels have been dropping rapidly due to one country, and this country is China. Since the 1978 reform and open up policies, China has been rapidly accelerating in manufacturing due to an abundance of cheap labor. As we know, they have quite a lot of people living there. So this brings me to my thesis question, which is, how has global trade and energy policies enabled dominance in solar panel manufacturing, and what are the environmental impacts of producing these more affordable panels? Before we can answer this, I'm going to take a quick look at China's history of solar panel manufacturing. So, in the early 2000s, due to their rapid industrialization, China was facing a humongous amount of pollution, and this is because when they were rapidly industrializing, they were using a lot of coal-fired power plants, which, as we talked about, do produce the most amount of emissions per kilowatt hour, and also, not to mention the smog that they produce. As we saw in that photo, it's a lot of black smoke, and also harmful gases like NOx, which is very irritating to breathe. So they were facing tremendous amounts of pollution. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the photos of China covered in the smog blanket. And people didn't really want to live like that anymore. So China started investing in an alternative form of energy. And one of the forms of energy that they landed on was solar. And they started investing huge amounts of money into it. We're looking at a couple $1 trillion that they've spent on solar to date. And they can do this because of their government structure, which is a single-party, communist, centralized planned government. So basically the key difference from compared to like the American government per se is it isn't going to switch beliefs every 4 to 8 years with the election cycle. It carries one belief throughout the entire, basically as long as they want. So they can really focus on longer term planning instead of having like these short term cycles. So that is why we see a lot of 4 to like 8 year plans that they use. For China, for solar, they use a lot of 5 to 10 year plans, so they can really think ahead and incorporate how long it takes to be able to really set up the infrastructure for solar panel producing. Not to mention the fact that the state banks are also controlled by the government in China, so they can control the flow of money and heavily invest it into solar via the form of low and no cost loans, very cheap electricity, and low to no cost land even. So the incredible amount of funding and supporting that China has supported into the solar industry has allowed for rapid acceleration and dominance in this industry. So let's talk about a way that China acts almost more like a corporation. So this is something called vertical integration. Vertical integration is something that you might see companies use, like very large scale companies. It's basically where every single step of the production line is owned by one company. So I have this quote from the International Energy Agency, and it says, China has built a fully integrated solar PV supply chain from polysilicon to modules. Basically, if you know solar panels, that is all the way from what's in the ground to what gets installed on people's roofs. So they own every single step of the way. It is all controlled by the government, and that has allowed them to really lower costs due to the fact that they can plan these companies in set areas. So imagine you just put everything very close together, so then you can save money on transportation costs. It also has allowed them to lower costs because you don't pay the profits of each individual step. You don't pay the polysilicon profits, you don't pay the profits for making the wafers, you just pay the final profit at the end. So inevitably there will be a lot cheaper panels compared to agencies and companies that don't have the scale to compete with like vertical integration, like the United States companies, for example. So let's talk about now the cost that comes along with this Chinese control. So in America, imagine a corporation is acting in a non-ethical way. Say your workers feel overworked. Then that is when maybe a union will step in, maybe the government will step in, and they'll work to form a way that like it is the employee feels like safely treated and all that. In China, the government and the producers are basically one. They are like the same company. So they are going to actually help the producers cut down in cost as much as possible. So take, for example, if you are stripping polysilicon of impurities and you need some chemicals, and you need to recycle these chemicals. So after every 1,000 panels, you have to recycle $5 worth of chemicals. They are going to go to the Chinese government and be like, these are $5 that we are losing on profits, and the Chinese government is going to remove the regulations saying that you can't dump this chemical, and then all of a sudden there is chemical dumping. As we see in that photo down there, that is polysilicon chemicals being dumped into waterways. Say that you need cheap electricity, which you do for polysilicon refinement, you need a large amount of cheap electricity. China's going to be like, we have all of these coal power plants and we will fire them back up to you and give the electricity to you. So then all of a sudden you already have contaminated waterways with these very quite dangerous chemicals and contaminated air due to this extreme amount of coal power being used. Then, say for example, you say you need some cheap work. The Chinese government is going to come in and say we are re-educating a lot of people, a lot of these immigrants that we have, and these people that have been living in this area, and they will come and work for you for free, and they will not be able to leave or communicate with their families. So, henceforth, now there is slave labor, chemical dumping, and very polluted airways in these areas that they are producing solar panels. So let's talk about who's trying to regulate this. So the WTO, or World Trade Organization, is slow to act. They don't really have a scale that can affect ethical and climate regulation, and really doesn't seem to care a whole lot. So they are off the board. International regulation, say America's regulation, will come in and they might say, we don't want the polysilicon from the areas that we know are using slave labor. China mixes it in with the polysilicon from areas that don't have reports of slave labor, and all of a sudden America takes it because there really is no other option for polysilicon producing. So they aren't really regulating either. And then we have the European Union. For one, this wouldn't affect us because we are not in Europe. But also, they take a long time to reach any concise conclusion because of the scale of their party. They're dealing with a lot of opposing views. So they aren't really a great option either. So really, no one's regulating it. So now we have ourselves a little bit of a trade-off. Would you, the audience, be willing to sacrifice the lives of the people and the environment that these solar panels are being produced for a affordable and rapid change in energy? Do remember, if net zero emissions are not reached by 2050, irreversible and unpredictable effects will take place on our climate, and we already know what's happening by 2100. We do not want to get there. The timeline is short, but do you think such a sacrifice is required? Ask yourself, are you really willing to change the system or keep living with the terrible things that are already happening? So, I don't think that we should be doing this because reaching current climate goals without China's system is possible, but it would require a major shift in how we think about manufacturing, not to mention a 25 to 50% increase in price in solar. But we would be able to meet the current goals, but expect a maybe 10+ year pushback just due to the time it would take to expand manufacturing. I argue that the current system raises extreme ethical concerns, particularly for the over 1 million members of the Turkic ethnic groups, primarily Muslim and other minorities, who have been detained and have been linked to forced labor in solar producing areas. So, just for reference, 1 million is 50 times the population of Durango. 50 times the population of Durango have been linked to slave labor in China. So I don't think we should sacrifice a region and allow for slave labor just due to the fact that we want cheaper prices. Because if we are ignoring how clean energy is being made, are we really fixing the problem or are we pushing it elsewhere? So this is something we love doing, and it's called cost shifting. Cost shifting is the act of just pushing the problem where we don't see it. So in America, we love to see this. This is nice and pretty. We see all of these solar panels. But in reality, this is what a lot of people's lives look like in China. This is not fog, but instead pollution from the coal power plants. That is a thick blanket of smog that lives over them at all times. So while we aren't seeing the problem, it is very real. And not to mention the lives of 50 times the population of Durango who are forced to work, women, children, men, all alike, without knowing that they will ever be able to leave these camps. And no one really knows about it because we've shifted the cost away from America into China. So let's look what we can do to move towards a better future. In the future, for one, solar manufacturing needs to be diversified. A large problem is China is the only one manufacturing solar panels. Just for reference, 80% of solar panels are manufactured in China. The remaining 20%, 98% of those use Chinese-made parts. So without China, there is really no way to efficiently and affordably manufacture solar panels. The solar panels that aren't using Chinese parts, those are the ones that go into space. You're not seeing those on people's houses. So places like the United States, Europe, India, Southeast Asia, basically anywhere that can be manufacturing solar should be manufacturing solar to reduce a dependency on China. This would allow us to hold China accountable for what they have done and would also allow us to move away from full reliance on them. The issue being we can't tell China that they can't be doing this because there really is no other option for us at the moment. A better system would be more transparent to consumers and governments, that we should be able to trace where these chemicals are coming from. And overall, the goal of cheaper solar energy is, the goal for solar is not the cheapest energy possible, but it is a cleaner, fairer system for everyone, from start to finish. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Do remember, what is out of sight is not always out of mind. Well,
question time?
It is question time.
Oh
Thank
my
you,
God, I'm
sir.
so excited.
Yay.
This is amazing. You answered
Thank you.
so many questions that I have had about this and things that I've heard rumors and whatnot prior to sitting down here. It's amazing. Good job.
Thank you. Yes, Lene.
I don't want to get off topic, but I am curious about one of the very first things you said, that there is a real possibility of 99.9% of coral reefs being gone. Can the Earth live without, I mean, that's essentially all the coral reefs.
Yeah, and
Can
most of the
the-
rainforests and
Can
most
the
of
Earth
the...
actually exist? I mean, is this as big as it sounds like?
It is as big as it sounds like. This is a very serious problem.
And can you talk just a little bit more about this what is it called that creates?
Polysilicon.
Yeah, can you tell me just a little bit more about what that actually is? That you showed a diagram
Yeah.
of digging in the ground. Is there something that comes out of
So
the ground to
it's-
create that?
It's silicon that is highly superheated. So it is heated to over 500 degrees Celsius to remove any impurities, and this is why it's such an energy intensive manufacturing process, because they need to be able to heat that up really hot. And then they use a lot of chemicals to wash off any more impurities. So it's basically this very pure rare material. And the whole thing is China is basically the only place that can produce it on a large scale. We have, I think, 2 polysilicon producers in America, and they do not produce on a large scale like China does. Yes, Kyle.
So you kind of had a contradiction here where you kind of cited that a monopolistic government that can run everything is free to do things that we're not able to do, right? And that's why they're successful in investing and building these plants. But then at the same time, you're saying their goals, their treatment of people, their treatment of environment,